Hey everyone, Camber here, showing you how to use your camera to make good videos. And getting a new camera is always really exciting, but it can also be a bit overwhelming once you start sifting through all the menus, trying to figure out which settings that you should use to make your camera's videos look good. So I'm going to give you a little shortcut by showing you what settings I use on the Sony a6100 to get you on your way to making more cinematic videos. Alright, so here's the a6100, and I'm just going to turn on the menus and we're going to go through all the settings. I'll give you the reasons for why I use the things I do. So first up, these are all grayed out because we're in video mode, but I have the JPEG image size set on L20 megabits or megabytes, aspect ratio 16:9, and when I actually do have it in the mode for taking pictures, I take RAW, not JPEG, but it defaults to JPEG in this mode. Long exposure noise reduction I have off. High ISO noise reduction off, and that's because I don't want the camera doing any kind of noise reduction for me. I'll do that later if I want. Color space, leave like that. For lens compensation, I leave, well, that should be on auto. Don't know why it changed. Leave all those on auto because I want it to automatically detect what needs to be fixed with the lenses I use. All those are grayed out. Interval shooting, that's just if you're wanting to do time lapses, and you just set that based on what you're going to be doing. And then here for memory, you can set what modes you want. Like I normally keep it 4K 24 frames per second, but I'll show you later how I have different modes set in the memories. So for example, I'll switch it to the memory mode, and I have set in number 1 for 24 frames per second at 4K. Number 2, I have 60 frames per second already loaded at 1/25 of a second on the shutter speed, and then 3, I have 120 frames per second, and then 1/250th for the shutter speed for the 180-degree shutter rule to make sure that our motion blur looks normal. But I'm going to go back to regular video mode now and keep it in manual there. So you can use that to set multiple modes, and it's good for if you need to switch quickly without having to actually go into the menus and change all those settings. So next, focus mode. I have continuous autofocus, focus area is wide, AF illuminator off, eye and face autofocus set. So I have on, human, I let this do auto, then face detection, frame display, that so it puts a box around people's faces, and then animal eye display as well. Autofocus with shutter on, pre-autofocus off, autofocus area auto clear off, display continuous autofocus area so it keeps that box around people's faces. I like that so that I can be sure what it's focusing on the entire time. And then if you want to micro adjust the autofocus, you can, but I just leave that alone because most of my images look fine. ISO is just going to be set to what you already have, and there's a button for it here, so you don't need to go into the menus to change that. Metering mode, that changes based on what you want, but I typically either use spot or multi-metering. Face priority and multi, I leave that off because I want to see what the overall scene is without it giving extra weight to people's faces, because I will use spot metering if I need to see exposure for a face or zebras. Exposure step, I like to have it in 0.3 steps instead of half. This is set to auto. Flash does not matter for video. White balance, I like to keep it most of the time in the Kelvin temperature so I can change that how I want, but there are also all the presets you have the option to use. Priority set and auto white balance, I don't even use auto, I just leave that on standard. This is auto high dynamic range. I don't want the camera doing that stuff for me. I'm going to use my own creative styles if I want, so I have it on standard now. This camera doesn't have actual picture profiles, but you can come in and bring stuff like contrast, saturation, and sharpness down so that that stuff is not baked into the image, and then you can up it if you want to in post. Picture effect, I don't do any of these because these are little creative weird things that I don't really like, so we're going to keep that on off. So the focus magnifier with no time limit, so it turns off when I want it to. The initial is 5.9. Autofocus and focus magnifying, yes, because I don't want it turning off the autofocus just because I'm punching in to make sure it's focusing on what I want. I leave the manual focus assist off because I like peaking, and I'll have my settings for when I'm using peaking on to high and red. And I usually use autofocus, but I just leave this peaking on so that when I do go to manual focus, it'll automatically be in the peaking mode. Then register face priority, I have it off, but you could, let's say for example, you were shooting a wedding or something like that. You want to go ahead and preload the bride's face in that, so when she's walking down the aisle, once it sees her face, it'll focus on her instead of other people. That kind of stuff is quite useful. So now we're into the video settings. Exposure mode, always manual. I never use program, aperture, or shutter. Manual, because I want to adjust the aperture, shutter speed, and ISO myself and not let the camera change it based on what it thinks, because we are smarter than the camera most of the time. File format, that just depends on what you want to shoot. 4K, 24 frames per second is always my base. And then for slow motion, I'll use HD at 60 or 120 frames per second. But something to point out, as you see, this says Super 35. That means it's using the whole sensor. Any of these modes means it's going to be cropping in on the sensor some. So for example, we come to full HD, we see 120 frames, it's going to crop in around 1.1, whereas all of these is using the full sensor for your shots. So let's just leave that in 4K, 24 frames per second. And I always choose the highest setting because that's going to retain more information, more quality for your video. I don't use the slow and quick settings. I like to do my own slow motion and slow it down as I want. Proxy recording I leave off, but if you have a slower computer, you may want to use proxy recordings. Basically, it records the same files, a lower res version, so then when you're editing, you can edit the lower res version, and when you're finished, you can then apply all those edits to your actual high res version, so the editing goes a lot smoother. So autofocus drive speed normal, tracking sensitivity standard, depends on what's going on, but I typically leave it in standard. Auto slow shutter I want off. This won't matter when you're in manual mode, but if you're doing something like shutter priority or auto, then it would automatically slow down the shutter to get the right exposure, which is going to change your motion blur, and you don't want it doing that. Initial focus mag is 4 times. You can change it to 1, but it's just extra button clicks when you're punching in, so I want it to go straight to 4 if I'm trying to punch in. Audio recording is on, of course, and then recording level just depends on the type of microphone you're using. And I want the audio level display on, wind noise reduction off. I don't want it doing that for me. For marker display, I have it off, but when I do use the marker display, I have it set to 235:1, and that's basically, as you can see on here, your lines that just popped up, that is your 21:9 aspect ratio. Movie with shutter is off. Then this stuff, I have E-front curtain shutter on. These enable, disable. Zoom, so zoom setting. I have clear image zoom on there. You can do optical, so it only zooms with the lens, but I like clear image zoom because it actually lets you punch in about 50% more, and there's almost no loss in quality. I stay away from digital zoom though, because that is where it does start to punch in digitally, and it just does not look very good. So display button, you can go in here and pick what you want. This is usually already checked. Histogram, I take that off because I don't really care. Auto switch for the finer monitor, basically when you come here, the screen goes off, as you can see there. But when you pull the screen out a little bit, then that doesn't happen. And I usually just tilt the screen a little bit, because otherwise I'd have to program a button to switch back and forth between the two, and I don't want to do that because there's only so many custom buttons on here. Next is zebra setting. So I have it off right now, but when I do use it, I use it at 100+, so it means anything that is at the top exposure point or above will show zebras. And it's a quick way to see what's overexposed in your image. Grid line, I always use the rule of thirds grid. Exposure set guide is off. Auto review is off. And then custom key settings, I just have in here for video. So for number 1, this button here, I have white balance. Down here, number 2 is my zebra display. I can toggle on and off. Then for up here, display, I leave that not set because that does the display button and it cycles through the different things on here. So I make everything go away, then everything come back. So those are things I like to have. That's just based on what you want. You can change that to something else. Then audio record level is the side button here. Follow custom right there is ISO, which is already set, so I don't want to change that. Then marker display down here, that's that 21:9 overlay that I showed you earlier. Metering mode is set up on the top on this custom button, and that's so I can quickly change between metering modes. And finally, if I have a lens with a button on the side, I'll use that for an autofocus, manual focus, on-off switch. But some lenses you use will have their own switch on it, so it won't even be necessary. But obviously, depending on what you're using, what you need, you can change that to what you want. Then I have the function menu settings. You can see everything I use on mine. So we have drive mode, metering mode, white balance, peaking display, zebra display, audio record level, steady shot. I don't know why the flash is there. I thought I changed it earlier. Touch operation, marker display, grid line, and interval shooting. So basically, I have most of these already programmed into those custom buttons, but if I was handing the camera to someone else, they could hit the function button and then easily access a lot of those settings that I was using earlier. So dial wheel setup, we have this set for aperture, and then this dial here is the shutter speed, and then you click where ISO is and then the shutter turns into ISO. The dial wheel EV comp is off. Function of touch operation, I have touch focus, but if you click on that, you can change it to touch tracking, so when you use that, you can touch an object and then it'll track that through your scene. Right now I use touch focus more often because I'll use that for focus pulls. Touch something here, touch something there, and it pulls focus between them. Movie button and movie mode only, basically the button right here. That makes it so that if I'm taking a picture and accidentally bump it, it won't automatically start playing a movie, only when I'm in one of the movie modes. Dial wheel lock to unlock, which means I can still control the aperture and shutter speed while it's recording. Audio signals I have off. And then for this network stuff, I'm not going to go over these, but basically I keep airplane mode on, I keep Bluetooth off just because I don't want it searching for signals and wasting the battery because I don't use those functions. Playback, you can set those things to how you want. And then here, monitor brightness, I keep the monitor all the way bright as well as the viewfinder in here because I want to be able to see exactly how the picture is going to look. Color temperature, I leave it at 0. Volume settings, this just depends on how loud you want it if you're playing something back. Tile menus off. For delete confirm, I put delete first because if I want to delete something, then it'll pop up delete and I don't have to toggle, and it makes that quicker. For display quality, I put high because I want to see the highest quality display. It'll use more of your battery, but it's important for me to see exactly how it is. If you first get your camera out and it looks like it's a little bit grainy or something, nothing wrong with the camera. This is the setting that's causing that. For power save start time, I put 5 minutes because there's a pretty big jump here and I don't want to wait 30 minutes to power itself off if I'm not using it, if I forget it's set up or something like that. Auto power off temp, this is an important one. I changed it to high. I've never had any of these cameras overheat, but this will give you more recording time if you're in a hotter setting before it'll shut itself down for overheating. NTSC, that's for using like 24 frames per second. PAL will give you 25 and 50. Touch operation is on. For these touch panel settings, I do touch panel only. Settings here I have set to absolute position, so wherever you touch on the whole screen is where your touch focusing will work. HDMI settings, I've got auto on the resolution, 24p, HDMI control on, and on for both of those. So we got mass storage there, and these all basically depend on what you're doing. Got format there, and not much else. So then we have custom menus, which is important because as you saw, there are a ton of menu options, so I like to put the things I use most that I'm not setting the custom or function buttons in here so I can get to it easily. So first, I always put format first, and it's grayed out because I don't have an SD card in here right now. Then I like my record setting, 24p, 100 megabits per second, or change it to whatever else I want. Then here we can change from 4K to HD in the file format. And then I like to have this here because I can't program it to anything else, so I can switch easily between focus and tracking if I want. Custom key, so I can go in and change things if I want or see what everything is assigned to for someone else. For these memory settings, I can go in and change those if I need to. Marker display with the marker settings. So in here, that's 235:1, but there's lots of other options in here you can choose with other safety guidelines. Aspect ratio 16:9, that's for pictures, but I still like to have it on here to change back and forth. Interval shooting, so I can get there for time lapses quickly. And then the function menu if I want to change stuff there. And then that is all of the settings for the A6100. And I want to make it very clear that there is a lot more that goes into making a video look cinematic than just the settings on your camera, but this is the first step to getting you in the right direction. So I also have a lot of videos and playlists on the channel that'll help teach you techniques to make your videos look more cinematic with the camera that you have. So be sure to check that out. But if this video is helpful, then please hit that like button, subscribe if you're new, because there's a lot of great stuff on the channel that will help you become a better filmmaker. And with that, I'll see you soon.